not all the end results can be presumable or forecastable. So if you know the conditions in XYZ country, you can estimate the results to come out of them as a result of the practice. As far as I can see, the main reason is that there is the lack of knowledge in the field of what human rights mean. We have been discussing about human rights. We have been discussing about it quite extensively. However, we find the answers very rarely due to the lack of knowledge. So this lack of knowledge is an example of the lack of linkage. In Great Britain, during COVID-19 days, the flock immunization was discussed, and this is against the human rights. And can you imagine, in a country like Great Britain, which is well advanced, that kind of herd immunity, which is against human rights, was possible to implement? And from the perspective of freedoms and human rights, some say that this body belongs to me, and we can see on the signboards held by people. And we can see that fundamental freedom, right to freedom, cannot be limited. Let me give you this example from our practice. I gave an example from Great Britain, but let me give you an example from our experience. This is what was conveyed by a student of mine to me. Okay, so you can adjust my microphone. I'm able to hear my own voice. So after the earthquake took place in February 2023, when this student goes to an authority for damage estimation, a classmate was there to help her. And this friend of hers said that her building was not heavily damaged and she can be given this certificate of resilience for the building. And my student was so surprised to be offered by this resilient certificate of her building. So you can see that how lacking the human rights are in the concrete concepts and the human rights. Excuse me, says the speaker. So today, we're here to discuss what the human rights are. So I'm here today to explain my answer, and I would like to explain the role and the duties of the municipalities in terms of the exercise of the human rights. I will try to explain them by giving a few examples to you. Distinguished members of the audience, what are human rights? At a first glance, this is a very lean question, maybe. This is what it might seem. There are some theoretical studies, but along with that, this is a fundamental question because the answer will help us differentiate the human rights from the other sorts of rights as the benchmark, because not all the rights are the human rights, as you may appreciate. Speaking of rights, while referring to a right of someone, what we mean is that this right has to be granted to him, her. This is how he or she should be treated. So this phenomenon of human rights as a concept means that this is the treatment owed to every single member of the society, and this means that this is the right, or this is the treatment that should be shown by us to every single member of the society. Maybe this is what you have paid attention to. So human rights are expressed in a passive way. people say that XYZ people have XYZ rights, etc. But active aspect of human rights matters the most. So human rights can be framed as the treatment that should be shown by every single member of the society to the rest of the society. This is how we can make it active rather than passive. So human rights are not just the principles of treating people, but of being treated by people. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech, right to food, right to shelter. So that kind of rights have to be present so that we would be humanized. If one is to get humanized, this person has to be granted with these rights. Despite the fact that there are some exemptions, these are the rights to be granted. So the human rights are a set of ideas or thoughts. And there are different types of thoughts over the course of human history. As we're all human beings, since we're not elephants or chicken, maybe the animal lovers can be mad at me, but don't be mad at me. So the humankind have some features. So we make the bread we eat, we invent the electricity that we consume, and we write books like Le Petit Prince, and humankind has established the Ombudsman institution. And of course, one can give lots of examples. And since we have established all these phenomena, this means that humankind has to be treated differently. So you have to treat people in such a way that humankind can exercise these rights to be granted, because not everyone is there to treat this way. So deliberately or non-deliberately, one can hinder the exercise or the treatment of the rights. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 1 stipulates that all the human beings are born equally, and they are given conscience and mind, and they have to treat each other brotherly, sisterly. While saying that, while stipulating that kind of articles, what is intended must be this. If I'm not wrong, this particular article, article number 1, is already present in the human rights documents of the world that we're living in, because article number 1 makes that kind of description one way or the other. By the way, there are some problems in the description of the article itself, but this is what I can say. But this particular article, the essence of this particular article, is present in every universal document. So article number 1 says that humankind should be treated and should treat each other brotherly and sisterly. But there are some issues in doing so. So there are some structural rights in human rights, and some structural rights should be exercised, but they are very much dependent on certain conditions, and there are some requirements that, as the name speaks for itself, require the exercise of it. And there are some conditions and there are some principles that make the exercise of the human rights possible. So basically, what's meant by human rights is this. So normally, of course, there might be some exceptions, but the norm says that, as I mentioned, the possibilities of humankind and the ethical norms of humankind should be possible, because we're in tendency to forget about our ethical possibilities. Maybe you have paid attention to this. In the schools, the knowledge-based capabilities of humankind is intended to be further developed. What do? Humankind invents certain tools, equipments. This is what is taught in the schools. However, there's nobody else to ponder on the ethical norms. So So, what makes a right a human right? We are referring to a treatment. There should be a treatment, but there should be a demand for this particular treatment, or to be treated as such. From the perspective of the persons, there are some active and passive principles and norms in the human rights. And let's take a look at this picture from the perspective of the state. So what are the conditions that make the exercise of these rights possible? So in other words, from the perspective of the state, human rights are the norms to be based on in regulating the public relations. So these are the norms to be based on in formulating the jurisprudence, and these regulate the public functioning. The positive law can be configured dependent on this, and when the public relations and public functions are adjusted based on this, persons, as much as they can do, the persons can be allowed to do whatever they are allowed to do based on the structures of human rights. And this is why the human rights should be there for law and for politics, and they are there to develop ethical rules. Either in the practice or in the theory, they're very lean, unfortunately. They are very weak. What is emphasized here is that, as it's widely accepted, human rights are not law. If there are jurists amongst us, do not get mad at me. These are the predecessors of law. They are based in different reality conditions. So of course, if we are to think about the law to establish the justice, because law should be there to eliminate the unfair practices which are already present. This is what we see. When the law is established in the democratic countries, it means that we can also pass the laws which can be enforced against human rights. In the international documents on human rights, we can say that they are not constitutions. They are the discourse of the states. So these are the speech acts. So if one state is signatory to one of the speech acts, it means that you are giving a promise to your citizens. And in the realities of the era and on the realities of the country, not depending on different norms on thoughts, you are making sure that you are providing the environment to ask for these norms for treatment, and you're giving a promise to your citizens that they're going to be treated XYZ manner. And one of the regulators that makes sure that the rights are respected is municipalities, and localization of these rights, meaning that you will have the access to those rights. It can be a right to food, right to health care. So if you want to make sure that the rights are there, you should be there to do whatever it takes to protect them, and you're there to exercise or implement the rights. The human rights are the rights of the individuals, but not all the rights of individuals are human rights. This is a criteria that I'm suggesting. So what are the rights of persons? What we can say is that for every single individual, of course, it's all dependent on each other, despite the fact that it is there in its own entirety, there are some differentiations in demands. One of the differentiations is that one of the differentiations is related with the structural possibilities of the humankind or of the individuals, and this is very much dependent on the preconditions. However, there are some rights on the individuals or the persons that they are very much dependent on the variable conditions. And one of the roles of the municipalities is to protect these type of rights. And the term of human rights can be used, this is what I want to use, for two types of phenomena. So one is on the demand of the safety and the fundamental rights, and the other is on the protection of the fundamental rights, and the rights should be there for healthcare, the rights should be there for education, which should be covered. So the first type of rights are the rights that are protected directly, and the second type of rights are the rights that are indirectly protected. So the first type of rights are the direct ones, as I said. The structural capabilities of the humankind can be exercised, and human-specific activities can be exercised thanks to that. And it requires the untouchability of the individuals. But pay attention to that. While exercising that kind of rights, you are not allowed to do whatever you want to do. You're not there to insult some other people. So these can be the rights which cannot be granted by the states, but these are the rights to be demanded, to be respected. And the authorities are the individuals. They are the public officers, but they're individuals. They're the persons at the same time. They are doing certain things at the same time, and they have the responsibility. So the respect for that kind of rights can be the problem, an ethical problem. And the role of the state is to prohibit or to prevent the violence or the violation of the rights. And this is what one can expect from the state. And the state should be there to protect in the moment of violation of the rights. And the state should be there to protect them in such a way to make sure that the rights are well respected thanks to the enforcement of the laws and regulations. In case of violations, there should be certain organs to protect, and the right to freedom should be respected. So no one can be subjected to slavery, no one's victim, no one can be subjected to the humiliating or degrading treatment. No one can be punished as such. No one can be arbitrarily arrested, or no one can be prevented from the freedom of association or freedom of speech.
Herkesten.
And everybody is entitled to own and demand the right to not to be touched. But we should be also noted that when matters, because when people are in a position where they act as they wish to, the individual has the right to defend. So the structural, the constitutional, and also individual rights, human rights are there. So when a person exercises their constitutional rights, it is ensured that they are not to be touched by anyone. So if they are involved and included in any kind of legal document, that also ensures that they won't be demanded, claimed, or touched by any other individual, and their rights in every single possible way should be respected. And for that to be able to perform, you need a level of education. So these type of rights constitute a part of the inherent rights of an individual, which I have listed. So the relevant freedoms also coexist with these rights. Of course, freedoms and rights is the general terminology. What freedom already inherits rights, but that's how it's always mentioned. So that's how it has been referred to. Respect to all those rights that I have listed earlier. If it is lacking, if there's no respect, there will be disorder and anarchy. And if the state oversees these rights, then there is suppression. So when you are watching any kind of any TV news, any show on TV, then it's easier to understand where these rights are violated. So almost every single corner of the world, insecurity and oppression became dominant in every single possible way, or in different possible ways. Esteemed guests, in a world where everybody is equal, where every individual has inherent rights, where they are not to be acknowledged, where there's another group of constitutional rights that are also naturally inherent to individuals, which allows every individual for them to prove themselves, the level of health care and shelter and accommodation, and also these are also individual rights. And this is here is the difficulty that we usually come across related to these rights. The provision of these rights is correlated to another series of rights like political rights, social rights, and individual rights that can be protected by political power. The state can protect them, but you need the will. So they are not actually related to the individual, but to the regulations and the political decisions made in a particular country. If there are different defined rights that they are dependent on the particular country, then they can be provided to that individual. The limitations set for these rights and whether they are able to protect the individual's freedoms is also is up to whether these rights have been designed initially, depending on the origins of the right, although they are used or seen as a tool where the individual has the right to perform. So actually, you cannot say that the individuals are not equal to each other. So in a document, socioeconomic rights mentioned in a document are not actually human rights. They are limited rights. They are provisioned and design rights. So the municipal rights are or urban rights is up to the protection of these rights, depending on the needs and demands on the local level and the localization practices. So, considering the human rights, when we tackle them as the ability to perform their individual's rights and demands, no individual has the inherent right to be prohibited in any possible way. And in the practices of these exercise of these rights, we know that human rights can be also limited, and asking that and also denying these rights and denying these limitations, and it also means that you ignore the conflicts of several different groups and also ignoring terrorism and a violation of these rights. Every single denial of these rights that have been already inherently provided to the individual also means that we are rejecting the limits and boundaries of others. So we have to also remember that we have also another aspect in our lives, another dimension of being an animal. So municipal rights, in order to make sure that these municipal rights are protected, like education, sheltering, and also legal protection, that relevant province and that local authorities level, so really performs all the necessary work to be able to protect that. And you can also see in the Article 14 and 15 in the Section 3 of the Municipal Code. And you can also see the elaborated versions of that. So in order for municipalities to be able to exercise these rights in local term and in any other different level or platform, every single municipal worker should be subject to education and training, because it's not very clear. If you have not learned how to do it, so you cannot just build up that correlation between the different rights mentioned in the legal code. Here's an example that I really enjoyed. I'm sure you have experienced it personally. In buildings, the last step of any kind of staircase is usually higher or lower than the rest of the steps. So you can easily fall. And that has also occurred, and some people also had brain damage. So what does that mean? So an engineer must have been violating human rights. And when we're talking about the professions, the relationship of the professions with the human rights is not that clear. So we have to also make it clear for every single profession and its relationship with the context of human rights. So every single profession and the things to do and the people who will decide about what to do related to the human rights can be a group of people in a council. Kuçuradi Yücelen, at the beginning of the 70s, was a party to a committee in a council of human rights in province and district level, which I have never heard there perform their work actually. This is not something that you can also put them to work. So when they are established as a council, they should be also doing their job. There's already something available and ready, but anyone who is assigned to do this task should just be subject to a training. And we have performed these trainings actually, so that they can learn their work and the work's relationship to the human rights as a context and a subject. And one of the other urgent needs that I have seen from remotely is as follows. So when you are moving into a city, if there's right to allocate a space and to accommodate yourself, to have shelter in that particular city or province, it's a task in the municipality. The earthquakes that we have experienced, which caused a loss of more than 50,000 citizens, is totally and entirely in the jurisdiction of municipal work. And taking that into consideration, so the issue of assigning the right to accommodate yourself and to build shelter should be re-regulated, and the regulations should be assessed, reviewed. And if it's necessary, any kind of architects or engineers who would like to do this kind should have an additional training, to be able to understand that they are in a position to own and claim more responsibility. Otherwise, the legal arrangements and the re-regulation of the subject can not be possible. This is all I have to say. I hope I have not exceeded my time either. Thank you.